and welcome to The Black Unconscious,
a mental health podcast about living, coping, and thriving while Black.
I'm Raquel Martin, a PhD candidate in medical and clinical psychology.
And I'm Dr. Justin Hopkins, a licensed clinical psychologist.
This podcast is not meant to be a substitute for a therapeutic relationship with a licensed therapist.
Thank you for tuning in, and we hope you enjoy the show. Hello, and welcome to The Black Unconscious. We are your hosts. I am Dr. Justin Hopkins.
And I'm Raquel Martin.
And today is episode 22 of Season 2, Family Business Part 2. So we're going to be continuing our discussions on families in general and also the Black family.
Yeah, so last time we talked more about how trauma can affect everyone in the family, and this time we're just going to be taking a different perspective and talking about some new things like the imperfections within families, how families are like a certain system, how our family relationships evolve as an adult, and just doing a brief like little education piece on genograms, which are something I use in family therapy, probably like with every new family I see.
Right, absolutely. So let's get into the first part of our discussion, which is basically just talking about the psychology of families, and as you put it, Raquel, how there are imperfections in families, right? Like, obviously, humans are very complicated. We're all very complicated, whether we want to believe it or not. We just may not be aware of all our complexities and the different things that we feel and think. Within families, right, every single person is different. There may be some similarities, but with those differences also come disagreements, maybe sometimes conflict or tension, and also misunderstandings. And so family relationships are just like any other relationship where there's a lot of up and down, where you're not always in sync, and there will be some things that are imperfect at times. And so even the parents who tried their very best, even the daughters and sons that tried their very best to be loving and caring, you know, even if you're fortunate enough to have a family that is very, very, very affirming, very warm, very present, there will still be things that are imperfect in those relationships because humans are imperfect, because humans are different. Every family handles those differences and imperfections uniquely according to how they, the psychology of the family, and both those differences and how they are handled have lasting impact on who we are and how those relationships develop.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I see, well, not the biggest thing. I think one of the trends that I see working with families is that children don't really see their parents as real people sometimes, which can be really annoying. Like, they just expect them to do all these things for them, and they don't take into account that they should have responsibilities too. And then parents also seeing all the things that they do for them, like buying them things and purchasing them things and getting them involved in every extracurricular activity and imparting their goals on their child, and that just being incredibly stressful. When I would say the trend with most children that I see is that they really just want to spend time with their parents. But parents don't really want to do things they want to do. And it's difficult because when they're younger, it's easier, right? Like, you can just take them to the park. You can just do something simple like ice cream or something like that. But when children get older, I definitely believe that you need to court your children more. Like, if they're playing Fortnite for the 50,000th time, which I'm sure they are, and you think the game is stupid, like, what's the big deal with just playing the game with them for like 10 or 15 minutes? Or like, what's the big deal with just letting them pick the movie, or I don't know, pick the meal or something like that. Like, yes, I'm sure that I think one time I had a patient and her biggest thing was just like, I just don't want to do the stuff that she wants to do, but it's not interesting. And I'm like, I'm sure it's not interesting, but it's your child, so just do it. Just be bored. Just go. Like, it's just, you want to spend time with them. Your children are not going to be the most interesting creatures in life, especially when they get older and they get involved in stuff that is just like whack, like watching people play games when they're playing the games. Like, that stuff doesn't make any sense, but you're also craving more time with your child. So you are going to just have to suck it up sometimes and be bored. Just like, you know, kids got dragged to like stores and shopping excursions and stuff. We're bored out of our mind.
Yeah.
Now is your turn to be bored
Right.
by your child. Just spend time with them. I really feel like when I finally do become a parent, like it really is just about spending time with your child.
Yeah.
Is the biggest thing.
Well, it's
just ridiculous.
Yeah, well, that's right. That's how you develop intimacy, right? Like spending time in the other person's world. And I think you're right. Like children, sons and daughters, like often, like very early on in particular, don't think of their parent as a different human, you know? They're kind of the wish-fulfilling object in their world.
They're their property. It's like, oh, well, yeah, because my mom's supposed to do that. No, she is not.
But right, the relationship does start off right that, right? Like when you're an infant, right? When you're a baby, when you haven't developed any sort of voluntary thought or movement, right? You're just a child, right? That first 1 year of life, like everything that you need just depends on your parent and your parent's willingness to do the thing that you need and to try to keep you alive despite your ignorance about anything that's happening around you, right? You don't really have consciousness yet then. And so this other thing in your life, this other person in your life that's kind of giving you the things that you need, they're really just an object to the infant within their own psychology that's there to give them the things that they need for survival. And then parents in turn can feel like, you know, those early years, the wakeful nights, the not being able to sleep, hearing the baby cry, not knowing what you need to do in order to satisfy the child. You know, it can feel like, well, the things that, you know, you're not really a human because the things that you need don't matter. You got to put those aside to secure the survival of your child. And so there is this way in which parent-child relationships kind of develop with this built-in objectification where the child is like, you're my wish-fulfilling entity in my life. That's what you're here to do, is like make sure you take care of me and keep me alive. And the parent's like, this is just my job. Like I just have to do whatever I need to do to make sure that you're okay and you're safe and that you're able to move on in life. And that's kind of where it stops, right? They're just a thing. They're just an entity in your life where like they're demanding a lot from you. And what I mean by stops is like that's the transactional aspect of the relationship. The good thing is that there's also love and moments of connection when the child looks into the parent's eyes. There's moments of meaning. And
sneezes in their face.
Or spits up on their work shirt. But there are these moments of bonding that happen too in the midst of the transaction, you know? And but how those, like, those, we're talking about the raw building blocks of intimacy and relationship between parent and child. And, you know, everyone has that with someone, you know, and if you don't, then it really does hinder your ability to form relationships, because those early connections, again, shape how you relate and go into the world.
Yeah, I think a big disconnect happens when they become teenagers, right? Because teenagers are going through teenage angst and all that stuff, because teenagers are just savages. Oh my God. They're just savage creatures. Like, I think I told one patient the other day, and she was like, I'm just so stressed out. I said, you should be. You have a demon living in your home. Teenagers are just demons. The kid was sitting right there. It was not going to say anything I'm not going to say in front of you. I'm like, you're just awful. You have to stop doing these things. But I often do an exercise with, like, not even teenagers, because they get a little bit, like, maybe a little bit younger, like the preteen, and I break down every single thing that the parent does for them, like to the T. So I'm like, okay, so what do you do every day? And they're like, oh, I wake up. Oh, okay. Do you wake up outside? No, I have a bed. Cool. Do you have your own room? Yeah, I have my own room. Like, yeah, everyone doesn't have their own room. Like, do you just go to school? Like, no, I get breakfast. I make my food, or my mom makes my food. And, like, break down everything from the smallest sense, like the fact that you have clothes, the fact that you have all these other things. Basically, this is when the child is being non-compliant with a lot of things. And then I go like, so what would you do if your mom forgot or your dad forgot to buy food? And I was like, and they said, oh, I will ask them to buy more food. And what they said, well, you were mean to me, so I'm not going to buy you more food. And like, why would they do that? I'm like, I don't know. What if you didn't have a bed? What if you just kept acting up and they took away your bed? And they're like, that would be pretty insane. And I was like, so when you say that you just lash out at your parent, just because they didn't do something your way. Like, why is it okay for you to do that? Like, why is it okay for you to not listen, not go to school, do whatever the freak you want, but your parent can't? And they're like, well, they're supposed to be an adult. And I'm like, well, you're getting older, so more things are expected of you. So children get all these like adult level privileges. They have all this screen time, which people, please stop with all the screen time. But they have all this screen time.
Like young adults, teens, adolescents.
No, like I have an 8-year-old who has an iPhone 10, a 10R. They actually told me it was like a 10R. I didn't even know there was another 10. Whatever. But they have the cell phones. You're giving them all these like upper level responsibilities, and then you're not giving to them on a contingency that they act a certain way. Like Christmas is coming up. There are a bunch of children who are bringing home bad report cards, but you don't want to be mean to them on Christmas, so they're still getting like a bunch of stuff. That doesn't make any sense. And it's also a confusing thing for children. Like you go to work, we go to work. If we don't go to work, we don't get paid. There are contingencies on everything. You're building up this whole person. They have to understand that has to be consequences to their action. I'm not saying taking away Christmas, but I'm also saying you have to like rear them in a way where they understand different things. If they're not acting right, if they're talking back to teachers, if they're doing all this other stuff and they're still getting like gifts and supplies, and also not supplies, but gifts and extracurricular activities and all that, like why would they ever act right? The biggest thing I see in family therapy is that the parents are the only one experiencing discomfort, right? Like a child is acting incorrectly, the child isn't doing what they're supposed to do in any avenue, home, school, any of that, but they're still getting stuff that they want. Like as a parent, you need to make your discomfort your child's discomfort. Okay, like why would they act right if they're not upset? Like you're mad, you want them to act right.
Make like when it comes to right, because like what's happening there is like the child's discomfort or their acting
is non-existent,
right, and it's becoming the parents' discomfort. So
it's only the parents' discomfort, right? Because they're the ones upset with how they're acting.
Right. So it's about like holding the child being held accountable for their own actions so that their discomfort actually is their discomfort.
Yeah. When I talk to parents and they're like, I keep asking them to do this and it's not working and all this other stuff, but they still get like all of these egregious like benefits. I'm like, well, why would they act right? If I didn't get paid, if I still got paid and I didn't come into work, why the freak would I come into work? Like, I'm not the fool. You the fool. You're the one who keeps paying me. Stop paying me. And then I'll probably come in. If the child is not feeling like they're being held accountable for their actions or doing stuff like that, and they're still getting what they want, why would they do what they're supposed to do?
Right.
There is no whole children should just know. No, they should. Why should they just know? You didn't just know. You were taught. There is no, she knows what she should be doing. No.
Yeah.
Because why would she? If I'm still getting what I want, if I'm still getting like my cell phone and my screen time and my going out with my friends, are you still taking us to the movies? Why the freak would I bring home anything else other than the grade that I'm doing?
Right. Why would I do anything more than what I am already doing?
No, because I don't have to. I'm still getting what I want.
Right. I do think, like parents introduce their children to really, really important like ideas about life. Parents introduce their children to civility, to morality, to a sense of like order. So this idea of like consequences, right? Like if a child is always getting what they want regardless of the things that they do, then they'll grow up in a world thinking that they don't have to do anything or consider other people or consider the consequences of their actions because they can still reap the benefits.
Yeah, and we've all met that person.
Right.
Who's just like, oh, I just thought it would turn out right. Why? Like, why would you think that? And I also think that's where the increase in bullying has come from. Like, yes, there's the social media aspect that I don't know why so many kids have social media, but it's not just like teaching your children not to bully others. It's honestly teaching children about respecting other human beings and why you should respect other human beings. You don't just tell children not to do anything because they don't just do stuff for no reason. It's more so about what's the reason why we don't bully.
Right.
Like because respect other people. You're teaching them to respect others. You're teaching them not to judge people. It's like, don't just say don't bully people. Tell them like, oh, it's important to respect the differences in others. It's important to embrace people for who they are. Because once you give them those values, the whole aspect of bullying just goes out the window. It's like, well, why would I do that? I respect people. Like, why would I judge them based off of their differences? We have differences, but we also have similarities. I think the bullying is that people aren't actually teaching their children to respect others or teaching them humanity.
Or perhaps even that child is feeling disrespected, and this is their way of regaining power in their situation.
Yeah, it's the whole hurt people thing.
Yeah, I do think, like, you jogged a thought about just like how it changes, right? Like how the dynamics change once a child is in that adolescent phase, that young adult phase.
When they're demons.
Yeah. There's opposition, right?
Yeah.
I actually don't think I don't know. I mean, I know you don't think this either, but I feel like there's like good and bad to it. There's that opposition serves purpose.
Yeah, there's critical thinking.
Yeah.
Don't bring that to me.
But also, right, like, so we talked about how, like, those early phases of the relationship between parent and child, the parent being that, like, wish-fulfilling entity in the child's life, and the child being completely dependent on the parent. And there's a power dynamic there. There's a really intense power dynamic, one in which the parent is completely in charge of whatever happens to the child. You rule the child's life, right? Whether it be food, going to the bathroom, their comfort, every single thing, like, you're responsible for. And that is a lot of power. And as the child develops, that child, as a human, is going to start to want to feel some sense of autonomy, some sense of independence. Yeah, and that's your whole job, is to foster
autonomy in them. That's why we don't wipe 20-year-olds behind. It's like, do it yourself.
Right. Or even do, like, little things that a child is capable of. And what each parent has to kind of figure out is, as their child is developing, when do they start to gain the capacity to do certain things? Because the moment, it's not quite moment by moment, but if a child has developed a capacity to do a particular thing and the parent still does it for them, that can be really problematic for the child's ability to develop a sense of confidence in themselves.
Yeah, I think there's also the point of when... So I've been reading up a lot on the whole dynamic between fathers and sons. And I'm reading a lot about how, like, when sons get to, like, a certain age or something like that, they, like, they start, like, getting bigger, like, start feeling themselves. And there's always some moment where there's, like, a challenge or something.
A power struggle.
Yep. And, like, I find that to be so interesting.
It happens between mothers and daughters.
I think it happens between mothers and daughters too, but I already know that dynamic.
Yeah.
Like, I've been reading more about the father-son aspect of it because I don't know that.
Yeah,
like, I don't really, see that. So, and I don't think my brother, he's a teenager, but I don't think he's reached that point yet. So it's nothing that I would have any kind of experience with outside of, like, reading about it.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty interesting how that does happen and how it, like, it seems like everyone goes through it. At some point, but it just has to be difficult. I remember watching Blackish, and it was Dre was talking about how his son, they always play basketball, but then his son beat him in basketball, and he was just like, and this is the end of everything. Like, his son, like, dunked on him or something.
Yeah.
And
there's a Family Guy episode
like that too. Oh my God.
Yeah.
My son has overtaken me. Like, it was ridiculous. And I'm so just ridiculous. Like, because he beat you in basketball? Like, he's just like, what?
Also, developmentally speaking, a teenager versus a 40-year-old, if that 40-year-old is not an athlete, it's going to have more energy, possibly more strength. So, but that's hard. It's
There's
a
still
shift.
a thing.
It's a
I remember Brandon talking about, like, whenever he's home, he helps his dad out with stuff because they're just very, like, they're a very hands-on, build their own handyman kind of people, right? And they were doing something. And and Brandon, like, works out every day. And they were doing something, and he was just like, man, my dad, he said, my dad he still can do it better than me. He's like, I'm trying to keep up with him. This man, I work out every day. I'm trying to keep up with my dad. He said, this is crazy, man. He's like, it's just never going to be a time.
Right.
It's just never going to be a time. And I'm just like, why does that even who cares? It's just like, it's just like dad. I feel like dads actually also have, like, parents just have a parent strength.
Yeah.
But I just thought it was funny that he was talking about this, and I'm just like, you're still a strong person. I don't see the big deal. He's like, man, I'm trying to keep up with my dad, man, and I feel like he should be slowing down or something. Like, this is crazy.
I think that stuff like does stick with us. Like, if we're lucky, it's pretty benign and it's not a big deal. But for some, like
yeah, he was just joking about it, but he was just really just amazed by like, damn, my dad just.
But for some, it can really, really bring up a hard power struggle between family members. Like,
yeah, I can see that,
and it happens a lot in those teenage years where like the child has lived just enough where they're like feeling, and they've developed enough where they have an ego, right? They have a sense of importance and a sense of self-efficacy, and they want to do things for themselves. They also may not have like the understanding of everything in life.
They don't.
Right?
They don't know what the freak is going on.
But
they think they do though.
But they feel
no one has ever lived the way that your teenager has lived. No one has ever
What's
had
that called?
heartbreak.
That's a thing. That's a thing.
Narcissism, like unrealistic. Like, it's just no one has ever lived the way they live. They never. You would, because you're not a real person as a parent, so you have never experienced heartbreak. You have never thought your parents didn't get it. Like, it's just the child's experience. That is it.
Right.
You don't know what you're talking about.
No one has ever learned. No, that is like actually, I want to find that term, but anyway.
Delusional?
No. But it's actually an experience that all teenagers go through.
They do, and it's why I like working with teenagers, because every time, like, it's never dull. I'm like, I know
I went through that. Like, I know my friends, every single like teenager goes through this moment where they feel like, right, because at that point, they still feel like their parents are not necessarily
Parents aren't human beings.
Right. They don't have the feelings that I have. No one's ever felt what I've had. And there's also, in tandem with that, with that thing, whatever you want to call it, like, there's also the sense that everyone is very much paying attention to their lives, like, more
when no
so
one cares.
like they are the center and everyone else is the audience, and they think everyone knows way more about who they are and what they're doing than they actually do.
It's like working with teens will never be dull. It will never be boring.
And some high schools, like, granted, right, they're really, really small, and like maybe there's a lot of like, gossiping going on, and that happens. But at the same time, like, the degree to which they feel like they are the center of everyone else's kind of observation is blown out of proportion. But it's
it's we were about to say,
it's
it's developmentally
appropriate.
It's supposed to be. Like, that's how you're supposed to be.
And that's when you're literally like developing an ego. Mm-hmm. Like, and again, that sense of like pride and confidence, and like you have an ability to impact others, and that you're important in other people's lives. And then you have these other relationships that are different from your family relationships, and those are starting to become more important than your family relationships. And so there's this, and you're learning, and you're becoming smarter, and you're wanting to make more decisions for yourself. And so then there's this built in every single family, in every single relationship between parent and child, there are these built-in developmental conflicts where a child is trying to explore a new psychological function that they have, while also trying not to lose the foundation that they have within their family.
Or I think the biggest, sometimes they're not even thinking about the foundation. Like, it's good if they do, but I think sometimes, because that's what kind of disrupts the whole system, right? Like, so when you work in family therapy, you work from like a systems perspective. Like, say we're looking at a family with like a mom, a dad, and like 2 kids, mm-hmm. right? So if we're working from that perspective, there's a bunch of different like relational aspects. There's a relationship between the mom and the son, the mom and the daughter, the dad and the son, the dad and the daughter, the dad and the mom. Like, there's all these different relationships. Like, we look at it from a systems perspective. But no matter what, any disruption with one person disrupts every single person.
Yes.
So when like you're going through, when I'm working with families and they're like, they come in and they say, I just came to drop him off or drop her off. Like, I don't need to participate in the therapy. We are a child and family therapy clinic. So I'm just like, well, congratulations. You decided to participate in therapy too. Because it's family therapy. Because anything that happens with your child disrupts your whole entire system, right? Think about what happens when you're consistently getting calls from the school. Like, you're at work, first of all. And that's always like a big thing with parents. Like, I done got called at work. I done had to leave work to come check on you a little behind. I am mad. So they already mad when they get there. But like that's disrupting your household, right? Because you're even though your child is in school, they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. You're getting calls at home. Then at work, you're having concerns about that. That's disrupting your individual dynamic. You may have a disagreement with your spouse or your partner or whoever you're co-parenting with about like the outcome. So that's disrupting your relationship with each other. The other child in the family isn't doing anything wrong. So they may be getting like pushed to the back a little bit. So that's just affecting their dynamic with their parents. Like anything that happens within the household with any person affects the entire dynamic of the relationships, right? Yeah. Sometimes there are different relationships most of the time between father and son and father and mom and stuff like that. So if your mom is the one who's coming down hard on you, that disrupts your relationship with your mom, and then you go to your dad or vice versa. So it's not possible to do family therapy or work on anything within this kind of dynamic, and even with adults, without addressing how it affects the unit, right? Like if I'm addressing the function of a behavior, because there are no dysfunctional behaviors. All behaviors have a function. Tantrums have a function. You're getting attention. Not going to school has a function for children, because like maybe they didn't want to hang out. They wanted to hang out with their friends, so they get to have more social support. There's always a function to your behavior. So if I'm looking at like the fact that maybe there's a child with special needs, or maybe there's a child who needs more attention, and there's a sibling who like falls to the wayside at this point. Because if you have one child that you feel like is doing okay, and you have one child that you feel like is getting more, is starting to be more difficult, the squeaky, what is it? Squeaky wheel gets the oil or something like that. Yeah. But as a result of that, someone's getting less attention. Imagine how the child feels in that sense. Right. And the other child starts having tantrums or withdrawing. You don't understand why you can't connect with them. Yeah. Like you can't fix anything with children without looking at the whole family. And that doesn't even just mean parents sometimes, because a lot of times you have other caregivers. You have aunts that are significant, or uncles that are significant, or grandparents. You have intergenerational differences that like grandma lets you do whatever the freak you want, and mom is like, we can't do this. And then mom's like, this is not how you raised me. Yeah. But like it makes no sense. Like you have to look at every single aspect of it, because there's an emotional interdependence. Yeah. Right? Like everyone's emotions are connected and stuff like that. Right, so you can't look at it in a bubble, because they weren't reared in a bubble. It's not even it's not even a thing.
I think one of the ways you see that, right, is like there's often there can be like good cop, bad cop with parents. Yeah. There's one parent who's way more strict and might be worried about the child not getting what they need and moving forward and developing in life, and the other parent who is less comfortable being enforcing discipline, because they're worried that the discipline will actually
damage them for the rest of their lives,
or impact the relationship negatively, whatever the case may be. And so the child kind of learns like who to go to for what things, and like, okay, like I'm gonna go to mom for this, because mom is going to say yes on this, right?
Or my mom's in a bad mood, you can't come over,
right. I'm
not going to ask her,
right. Or I already know,
it's different with boys and girls too. That's another thing. Yeah, like it's just like.
It is.
It's different with like how boys it's like you have to also look at how they interact with each of their parents, because I think that's a difficulty too.
Right. I think one of the things I did want to mention real quickly is just like how I think most parents, again, if there is love and positive intention within the family, like most parents intuitively know the things that were difficult for them in their relationship with their parent.
I don't know if I agree with that.
I think they try. I think, well, maybe not intuitively know, but there's an unconscious awareness and a present experience of it in some way.
Like they kind of just feel like something was off.
Well, they feel whatever the imperfection was within there, again, because no relationship and no human is perfect, but those imperfections have impact, right? Like even though you intend to do certain things that were helpful and beneficial to your child, doesn't mean that that's going to be the unequivocal impact. There might be some beneficial parts, but there might be some not so beneficial parts.
Oh yeah, but are you talking about in terms of, so that can be like two different things though. That can be, if you're talking about a parent and you said like the way that they see their relationship with their parents, that's one thing, but their intention with their own children.
Yes,
that's another
thing. I think I'm talking more so about the latter. That their intention.
Oh, with their children, with their parents. Okay, you mean with their children,
right? Their intention with their children is unconsciously shaped by their experience by their parent, and the good things, but also the things that weren't so positive for them, and in terms of how they experienced it. And what happens is that, and actually, Jada Pinkett and Willow Smith in their Red Table Talk, in that series, Jada kind of she encapsulates this with one thing that she was trying to tell like Willow and another, I think her mother who was sitting with her, and they were having this conversation, is that there were certain things in her family that were incredibly damaging that happened, and she, having gone through those experiences, tried her damnedest, right, not to be that kind of parent for Willow and Jaden. In so doing, her efforts in so doing that actually did cause them some challenges, and did actually, it prevented some things, but it hurt them in other ways. And so I just think like she really, like, maybe that's one thing that we can post on our Instagram again, is just that, like, that snippet, just realizing that she was attempting to not visit her own family demons onto her new nuclear family, but that approach, of course, is not going to be perfect, and so those imperfections have lasting impact. One example, if I could be a little bit more specific, is that a parent who grew up with parents that were neglectful, right? So if your mother or father grew up with parents who were a little bit more distant, a little bit more cold, a little bit more withdrawn, didn't take as much interest in the things that you did in terms of school or extracurricular activities, you, in touch with the pain of that, may want to make damn sure that you are present in your child's life so that they never experience that kind of pain. And that's the mindset that you have going into parenting, even before you've met your child. What could happen, though, is you may end up birthing a really, really independent child. So, a lot of parents have ideas about their children before they even meet them, right? Like what they want to do, right? Like what they hope the child will become, where they hope the child will go to college. I have a nephew, my brother and I both went to Hampton University, and so that he is dressed in Hampton University clothes, right? So that is something that sits with him. So there's an implicit expectation for him.
I get that.
He will, what I mean?
I always said that if my child didn't go to a HBCU, a part of me would die.
Right?
Like, for real. Like, I was just like, what did I do? And you just think, what did I do wrong?
Yeah.
I gave you all the Hampton hoodies. Your uncle gave you Hampton stuff. Why do you hate us?
Right.
Just tell us what we did. Like, did we not love you
right,
enough?
Right.
Like, why would you do this to us? Like, we've been doing this for years. Like, look, this is you in a Hampton onesie. Why do you hate us? Like,
so in that scenario, right? Like, if the child doesn't exactly do what the parents hoped or expected, the parent feels like they failed, the child feels like they've disappointed the parent, like, and then there's emotional jockeying around those positions because the child doesn't want to disappoint the parent doesn't want to fail the child. So,
well, that's a good term. Emotional. You said jockeying.
Yeah, like
we
all have like our own emotional posture, and then like in families, we figure out how to jockey around it because of the the experience that we have, and again, whether it's conscious or not. But in that scenario, right, like where there's a child that is really independent, but a parent who had parents that were neglectful, they may want to be really, really involved in the child's life. And the child may benefit from that parent's warmth and affirmation.
More so in the beginning.
But more so in the beginning, right? And then there'll be some tension. And it goes right to what you were saying, right? The child may not want the parent to be so involved when they are 17 or 18 because they're meeting friends, right? But for the parent, that's really hard because you remember when you were 17 and 18 and maybe how lonely you felt because maybe if you were an only child or if your parents weren't as involved. So you try to correct for your own emotional experience within your children. And every single parent tries to do that. They do it with positive intentions. But again, we have those intentions even before you meet your child.
I think it's not even just like feeling lonely. I think a lot of parents got into a bunch of shit when they were younger and they just don't want their children getting into it. Like when there's a family, she was like, oh yeah, I got pregnant at 16 and she's 15. So I'm on her. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, just because that was your experience doesn't mean that's theirs. Or, the biggest thing with like fear right now with like black men and black women rearing their children is that like they're not going to make it home, which has always been a fear anyway. But I do think the trauma of seeing so much stuff on TV is increasing your hypervigilance and stuff like that. And it can be the emotional aspect, but a lot of it is like, I did some crazy shit when I was a teenager. I really am glad my parents like thought they knew everything. They knew about like a quarter of it. I really can't have my child doing the same stuff. Like, I'm lucky to make it out alive. I have had people in my cohort that are like, I am lucky to have made it out alive of my teenage years. I did some really dumb stuff. And you want to protect your children. But like, if they don't have that experience, I don't know.
Your child may not be interested in doing the same dumb things that you did.
They may.
They may.
But it's like, well, how much are you going to protect them from? And it just seems so exhausting. And also, like, it's also easy for us both to talk about it because both of us don't have any darn kids. So it's easy for us to do that, to just be like, oh, well, just blah, 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 blah. And it's just like, but it's just like, in my mind, do you really want to know everything your child has been doing?
Yeah. Like,
no, why? What is that going to do for your soul? It's going to stress you out even more.
And as a non-parent, right, I cannot imagine, right, being so responsible for someone's life. And then seeing how the way that you approach that responsibility, again, whether it's wanting to be really, really involved in your child's life, or let's say the opposite, right? The contrary. Let's say your parents were really, really involved, and it felt like smothering, and then so like you really, really want to give your child more autonomy, but your child is growing up in a very complicated world and they're needing more input from you or needing more time from you, needing you to give them more direct, so there can be a mismatch, but I think again, like every parent tries, consciously or not, to adjust for their own emotional experiences, own emotional wounds within their experiences with their family when they're parenting their children.
Yeah, that's where genograms come in. So like genograms are just a visual representation that we use in therapy for family therapy. And we're just using like symbols like a square for guy, circle for girl. Hopefully I got that right because I do them all the time. And then you're mapping out basically all the relationships in the household, like step parents, deaths in the family, divorces, incarcerations, behavioral issues, mom, dad, grandma, all that other stuff. But the whole point of it is to explore and gather information about like themes within the family. So like say I'm looking at a 16-year-old and I'm doing like a whole genogram or whatever the heck. And I'm looking at like where their relationship is with their parents, with their dad, with their mom, with their aunt, their uncle, and stuff like that. But when I'm looking at themes, I also want to know more about the parents when they were 16, right? So if I understand just basically what you said, if the child is, say the parent got pregnant at 16 and this child is 15 and the child is starting to notice that their mom is starting to be a little bit what they consider more irrational lately. They're just like, it seemed like she was cool, but now I feel like she doesn't trust me as a person. So I'm like, well, okay. So we're looking at these age ranges and I kind of want to see what happened to your child around the same age range to see if I can notice some themes about what may have changed for them at this time that may be different for them. And it might not just be getting pregnant. It could be like someone became incarcerated. It could be like someone had a bad event where they went out to a party and I don't know, it was like, it got them in trouble or, it could just be something. But the whole point is to find themes about like, what is your child's experience bringing out about your previous experience, and how that can be basically imparting itself in the family dynamic. Like how is that disrupting your relationship with the child? And that's why they're always really helpful to see. It's not just to see like, well, who was married to who and when do people get separated. It's also good to see like, how were you when you were a teenager? Like we talk about the child all the time. When I start off with the first couple of sessions, I'm really just trying to get to know the dynamic of the family, and I want to know how you were reared. Like and I always say reared, and someone mentioned this. My mother always told me that you raise cattle, you rear children. So that's why I say reared instead of raised, because I know it sounds odd, and it's just how what was like beat into me as a child. So like it there's really so much that you have to look into when it comes to working in family therapy, because it's not just about the child. It's not individual therapy. I'm working with the entire thing. That's why my favorite thing with families is when they're like, oh, well, I just brought them because they have this issue. And, I didn't think I'd have to be in therapy too. Oh, what you do, girl? You do, sir. Like you have to be in therapy too. Where do you think they like you're their most salient relationship? I'm only with them 1 hour a week. I'm not gonna fix them because honestly, nothing's broken. They're just this is how they're functioning at the moment.
I do think in family therapy, and I'm gonna go back to genograms in just a second, but I do think in family therapy, there's often like an identified patient, quote unquote, the person that the family.
Yeah, but we were told that's like a sarcastic thing. When we put identified patient, our supervisor was like, that's a sarcastic thing because the whole family is a patient. I mean, this is who we bill for.
Yeah. Well, and
all of y'all are the patient.
And I was talking about right. Well, insurance.
But we do have to put identified patient. You do. And it's like, no, it's all of them. No.
So I was just like speaking in terms of like the family's perception, right? The family may come in and
that's who we name as the identified patient.
Right. My 9-year-old is depressed.
Yeah.
And the 12-year-old is off doing his own thing, and mom and dad got their own dynamic. And often what you see as you uncover like the emotional posture of everyone in the family and how the relationships are formed and their dynamics, what you find out is that identified patient or that identified person with the concern, that child who is depressed, is actually holding on to feelings that other family members have that they're not in touch with. Exactly.
Actually, the difference between childhood depression and adolescent depression is that childhood depression is actually more indicative in factors within the family environment. And adolescent depression is as well, but it's also it's also very important to look at aspects outside of the household, like social support and stuff like that. But when they're younger, we always like look first like at the family because they're with the family more. They're not going to be in a million extracurricular activities. It's like the family dynamic that imparts it. So that is actually more indicative of like more linked to the etiology of child depression and child anxiety versus adolescent.
Right. Because like there are different developmental stages for each for each like age category that you're in. Like a child has certain like developmental goals or objectives. Eric Erickson talks about that, like the 8 stages of human development.
Oh yeah.
And there are these like so it starts off with like trust versus mistrust, like those first years from like birth until 1 or 2, like you're first learning to trust, and depending on how like certain dynamics are worked out within the family, that child either
if you learn, like if it's trust versus mistrust, and you learn mistrust, it's like, oh, okay.
If you can't trust the person who is in charge of your entire well-being, that sets you up for really unhealthy relationships later in life. That first stage. Next stage is like autonomy and shame and doubt. I won't go over all of them, but it basically just outlines how at each stage, like children are trying to accomplish something developmentally within their psychological development. Yeah. And so for children, their world is still very much within their family. As an adolescent, you're comparing yourself to other peers. I think that stage is called industry versus inferiority, where the child is, as an adolescent, you're understanding logic and reason, you're developing some self-awareness, as I was mentioning earlier. You're also competing with your peers. You want to do things that they're capable of doing. You want to be able to perform certain tasks and have some sense of self-confidence. So it's not just about the home environment. It's also about others.
It becomes more and more about others the older you get.
Right. And then having their own authority becomes very important then, and that's where you see some conflict between the parent and the adolescent. But so that makes a lot of sense to me, right? That child depression is very much indicative of family relationships, and that's a really, really big deal. The only other thing that I'll say to kind of like relate it back to the genograms is just we've kind of talked about how transgenerational trauma happens, or another way to look at it is transgenerational emotional proclivities. Those genograms really outline those. I knew you were going to laugh at that one.
Sorry.
Like how we, the emotions that we tend to feel and how we tend to manage them, essentially.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
Right. Like that gets handed down. It does. And you can see it transgenerationally in terms of like how it panned out. So, I think you mentioned, right, it talks about the quality of those relationships across generations. You can see where there's been estrangement, where someone's been kind of banned from the family. You can see where there's just really intense conflict. All of those things are so insightful. And that's where you can get to see like these interesting things where like my great-grandfather and his brother had a fight, and my brother and and I have this really huge, like, contentious relationship.
Oh, I thought you were talking about
father,
you.
I'm not.
This is
I'm not.
example?
This is just examples.
Fine.
And now it's like I lost interest, not listening anymore. Or my father and his brother had an issue. You know, you start to see those things. You know, you start to see those patterns. And how it severs
the relationship and why you don't talk to that side of the family anymore.
Right.
And don't get it twisted. Passive aggressive stuff is tension as well. That counts as conflict too. Because some families think, oh, we don't argue. But y'all haven't talked to like so-and-so for a minute and we're all going to ignore like the elephant in the room. Passive aggressive stuff is
passive aggressive is worse because it doesn't get validated or acknowledged.
It doesn't. And it's honestly, I always say like, I don't want passive aggressive. I want like aggressive. I can't deal with it. It just makes me so uncomfortable.
Imagine, with passive aggressive, like you can feel like, or anything that's like not completely conscious. You only feel the effect of it.
Yeah,
you don't know what's
like
causing
it's
it.
Like my
you
chest
only
is
feel
tight.
the effect. Yeah.
And then imagine a child being in that environment, like, oh, I don't think I'm supposed to talk about. I mean, I don't think I'm supposed to mention it, like, because they know. But that's like the biggest issue, and it's
right.
I just passive aggressive stuff. I'll just be like, so what did you mean though? Like, oh, well, I don't think we should talk about it. No, I think we should talk about it because I'm confused.
Right.
And if we don't talk about it, I won't know not to do it again or how not to do it again.
Right.
Like if you're just gonna say, oh, well, you know, I don't.
Right.
Like passive aggressive stuff makes me, oh my God, it makes my chest hurt. I'll just be like, I can't breathe in this room.
Well, that made me just think of like most of it coming from the like parents, but you know, children do passive aggressive things too.
As a result of learning it from their parents.
I think
children
that's
don't.
true.
Children learn communication, learn all those styles.
And how and again, like what emotions are okay to feel within their family, what emotions
express.
are not. Like when you have like, for example, I've had many patients tell me that there are certain emotions that they don't feel. Like I never get angry. Which is never a thing. And that's not a thing. Every single emotion that there is exists within us to some degree. And that includes like the taboo ones, like sadism, masochism, rage, hate,
anger, guilt.
no, like all, like I'm every single human quality exists in every person to some degree.
Yeah, that's why. What did we post? I posted we posted on the page the anger iceberg. Like, it's because I always anger is such an easy emotion to say you have, dude. Like, okay, yeah, I'm angry. For some, you're because some people are like, right. I don't feel angry at all. Yeah, exactly. You're right.
And usually, people who are depressed, there is a lack of conscious anger.
Yeah. You're right. So I'm actually going to take that back. So anger is not an easy emotion for some people.
Right. But I get what you mean though. If you're conscious of it, it can be like a default.
Yeah, but on the post, what day did we do this post? We did it on the 7th, December 7th on our Instagram and Facebook. And it's like anger is above the water. Like it says angry, but under the water is embarrassed, attacked, guilt, grief, nervous, frustrated. Like these are all the things.
Right.
But all you see is anger. And this is one of the main reasons that, you know, children and especially little boys are misdiagnosed with behavioral disorders instead of mood disorders.
Especially Black boys.
Yeah. It's one of the biggest. This is why we need way more people of color and way more people who are more culturally competent to like work with children, because they are just diagnosing our kids with all this BS. And I say our kids because we're a community. Every Black boy or Black girl, those are ours. So like they're misdiagnosing our kids. They're putting them in these classes they don't need to be in. And all they need is like therapy and some yoga and some breathing techniques that they're going to use in the rest of their life, or learning how to focus. Like they're just doing it wrong. And I can also say this because I have worked in the school districts at DC and Baltimore, which are clearly some like really intense situations. And I've just been so frustrated. Like, or it could be the fact that they're going through environmental traumas every single day. So they're hypervigilant. So they have these concerns.
And for boys, right? Again, I feel like I can't go through a single episode without talking about toxic masculinity.
And yet we still haven't had an episode solely about it.
That's true. Yeah. That's so true. I mean, we can't exhaust it, but there's so much. Like what you just said, right? The misdiagnosis of boys, right, can very much, and how depression is expressed in boys and young men.
Like specifically Black boys, because people, and also I think actually, one of the studies I looked at, boys in the Latinx community too, of color, children of color.
Yeah. But even in the Latinx community, right, there's something called machismo, right? There's this very...
but in the Black family, but for Black dudes, it's just like, don't disrespect me. That's the same thing to me. Cause the same way, like, it's the same way, like, dudes are willing to go to jail over disrespect.
Similar, very, 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 very similar. But like there's a lot of rigidity there, right? You can't, as a boy, like you're not, there's the expectation that you can't be sad, right? So instead, how do you express that sad? Well, you try to be tough about it, and it transforms into anger. That anger leads to a behavioral diagnosis rather than a mood diagnosis, when really that child is depressed, that child is needing some warmth and care. And it compounds, because if the child is angry and then they're acting out and they're doing something oppositional, they're getting in trouble at school, they're not doing what the parent wants, then they're getting punished. That punishment is further depleting their need for warmth and affection.
And their relationship with their parents, so they feel less likely to talk to them, so they hold more stuff in.
They become more lonely. And so you can see how, right, like, depending on the family dynamics and the social constructs that family endorses in terms of what boys can do, what girls can do, so on and so forth. And
if there's even a family to have a dynamic with.
Right.
Like, and it sounds so simple. I'm sure everyone's nodding their head. It sounds so simple. And yet, people are still fucking it up. Like, it's like, it's
in terms
so
of what?
simple. In terms of the diagnosis, in terms of looking at the whole picture, in terms of just not just like showing up.
Yeah.
Doing some assessments, writing stuff down, and not taking time to actually talk with the kid.
There's a simple question that can help like
me.
resolve some of this. Is just think to yourself why the child might be angry.
And it's easier for us to think that way.
And don't assume, right? Like just treat them like a person. Like, children are people. They don't have the developmental. They don't have like developmental ability to verbalize everything that they see and feel, but they still see and feel it and internalize it. It impacts who they are. So you have to kind of do that kind of inquisitive, self-reflective work for them and think about the other things in their environment that are dictating their emotional expression.
Yeah, one exercise I like. So like when we write reports, I don't like writing the race. And our like assessment reports, because I really want to see, because we do case conferences, right? Like we've always done case conferences every year of any site I've ever worked at as a clinician. So you want to be like, so this is the patient. I'm not going to add the race. We got the age. So what a diagnosis do you have in your head? Cool. Would that diagnosis change if I told you that they were white? Would the diagnosis change if I told you they were black? Would the diagnosis change if I told you they were a boy? Would the diagnosis change if I told you they were a girl? Because you key these specific things according to like the sex or the race of the child. So like, oh, white kid acting out. Okay, what's happening in the home? We got to see like what's happening in the home. Is everything okay? Black kid acting out. It's probably being defiant. But it's the same thing. Or a little boy like crying all the time. Like, oh, we got to make sure everything's okay. A little girl crying all the time. Girls are emotional. So maybe they're just, just being emotional about things. Like, it's very different. And I think it's easier. Like, if you had to think about just the environment right now, like with young children and watching the news, or not even the news, because you can go on your Instagram feed and see some really traumatic shit that really irritates me at this point. What would you do? Like, how would you feel as a child? Like, and it's easier for like, if you were looking at a patient and you were just thinking like, well, let me think about how I was as a teenage, as like a teenage black male. Because even as a black female, I can't, like, I had to talk with a patient, like, I don't understand what it's like to be a black teen in Baltimore. I never will. A black male. I will never understand what it's like to be a black male. Like, my experience won't be the same as yours or even as your mom's, right? But you can kind of think of things that kind of, like, some kind of rage. Like, I just feel like at some point, I don't know. It's like these boys, they just go through like this anger period. There's just like an angry process that I've just been seeing in a lot of the teens that I've been working with, like a lot of the black teen boys. Yeah. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, so how would you feel if like every time you turn on the news, someone who looks like you is getting killed again? And this is someone who could have been down the block from you, and there's no explanation. And then also when we're looking at like, expectations in the media, that's the only stuff I'm seeing about people who look like me. I'm not seeing any like positive indications of young black males. I'm not seeing anything other than like adults who are like, I don't know, rappers. I can't rap, or basketball players. I can't hoop, and I never played football in my life. Like, all I'm seeing is this negative stuff. I would be pissed. Like, it's just, and it's different for black males versus black females, because as a black female, I feel like and there's a bigger push to it now. I feel like I'm constantly surrounded by like doctors and like not even just in my personal circle, but like pushing initiatives for females to do more stuff and seeing doctors and lawyers, there is still that whole like cattiness that you see represented on TV. But for Black boys, the more I work with them, the more I'm like, there's just this age range where there's just like an anger.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for Black boys, again, it's so easy to feel emasculated, right? Your environment, your world pretty much tells you, again, like you said, the images that you see, they tell you over and over again in subtle and explicit ways, in no uncertain terms, you're not worth very much.
Yeah, you know what? I didn't even think about that piece of where it could stem from.
Right,
like
but
the constant invalidation.
Right, but that's at least one aspect of every single Black person's experience.
Yeah.
Right, and for men, if you're as a boy, if you're growing up with this idea that you have to be a person of a certain status and strength and robustness and toughness and all of these different kind of dominant, assertive things to have some worth as a human, that can be particularly damaged to a boy's image. But we also know that it is just as damaging to the image of for our young Black girls.
Yeah, I think, and it's different for everyone's experience. It's just I was just always surrounded by like a bunch of Black women who were like doing everything amazingly. So I never really, I'm blessed enough not to have struggled with that as a child. However, I will say it came out more when I was like going to school, not at Fisk, of course, because like that was Black excellence, but more so when I left like my like amazing bubble of my HBCU and had to venture out. That's when I saw it more. Yeah. When it wasn't really that many people doing, I would say there were more people doing masters, but there weren't that many people doing PhDs. Mm-hmm. And like even just for a PhD program, the acceptance rate for a PhD is like less than 10%. It's hard to get into a PhD program in med school. So you can imagine how many people look like me in the program. Mm-hmm. And then like venturing out to wanting a mentor who looked like me. It was just like a whole thing. So I didn't feel it as a, and that's why I hold like my female friends so dear, because they are doing things such as that. So it's so important for me to, I don't really get that in my work environment. So it's so important for me to hold that within my my social environment, because it's really important for me. Like it's really easy to get down when I'm constantly surrounded by people who don't look like me. Mm-hmm. But I didn't get it as a child. Like the issue, I got it more as an adult. Yeah, like trying to go in this career field and just being like,
that HBCU to PWI transition is real.
It was so freaking annoying.
Yeah, and the higher you go up in families, degrees. Right. The higher you go up with your degree or with your professional success, there will be less people that look like you, and also the other side of that, there will be tons more invalidation that you experience on a regular day.
And it's even more difficult for Black men, right? Because Black women do higher degrees more than Black men do.
Yeah. As it stands right now, I mean, Black women there is something happening for a lot of our Black boys and Black men.
Yeah, I think there's more of a change. I'm thinking more about like when you were in school, though. Like, I think there's been more of a big push now. But like, imagine like when you first started
in terms of like program. In terms of Black men moving forward.
Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking about just like how like there are more educated Black women now than there are Black men.
Oh yeah,
way more. There's a huge gap. So I think there is something happening for our Black men and our Black boys where they're not able to make that kind of progress as well as Black women have.
That's why it was so much. That's why it was so much easier for dudes at HBCUs, because they were like, I forget how many there were women to men, but it was higher. Like at Hampton, was it way more women than men?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's why you can't see my face, but that's why dudes was just gaming people. It was just like it was so many more women than men. Like
Michelle Obama also made a statement about how families raise men versus women, how they raise their boys versus girls, and she said, we tend to parent our daughters but mother our boys. Yeah. And what she was kind of saying is that there's a different set of expectation where she was saying in some heterosexual families, there's this tendency for boys to get a lot of warmth and consideration and forgiveness, right? and girls who are maturing emotionally faster and tend to, they are kind of told to try to understand the boys better.
Yeah, because black girls become black women, and black women have to handle everything. And I'm not saying black women do have to handle everything, but that's the perception.
Right,
it's like, well, you better figure it out, because you're going to be a woman one day.
Right.
And you're going to have to do all these things.
And the opposite doesn't happen, where instead of like girls developing faster as boys, I mean, we could tell boys, look at your sisters, like look at your female peers as like models for how to be more autonomous and emotionally mature. But instead, I think we tell our girls that they need to be understanding of boys being boys and all that nonsense. Which
is crazy, because we live in a society where we try to train women not to be raped instead of just training men to stop, be better. Stop raping. Like it's right. It's like, well, how short was your skirt? I could be naked, whatever, still not asking for it. Consent stops as soon as someone says no. It doesn't matter what the person is. That's what, and also getting back to like the whole, like with black boys in particular, Dr. Jawanza Kunjufu has a whole series of books, like The Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys. My mom always said as soon as she found out, she read them when she was in school. She's a big Black Pride person anyway, so I was lucky to have that. But when she found out, like, she was pregnant with my brother and it was a boy, she like read the books all over, made sure he had like representation of like posters of black men around him, made sure every single That's one dope. Of my brother's physicians is a black man, like doctor, dentist, all that. Every single one. Wow. And if it's not a black man, it's a black woman, but it's a black person. She prefers for him to have like doctors that are black men. Yeah. But she's like, I mean, okay, I'll deal with a woman as long as it's black, stuff like that. But she's just like, there's just so much stuff that's like subtle and not so subtle that we never look at the fact that even with teachers, I didn't have a black teacher until I went to Fisk. I didn't have a black teacher until I was in college. Wow. And we just posted that thing last Friday about, was it last Friday that we talked about? Well, last Friday we posted that study about how having
a black teacher.
No, that was two. I know we be posting like amazing stuff consistently, so it's so hard to keep track of like all of the amazing things we post. So I'm like, but it was the one research study we posted that talked about how strong cultural knowledge is a protective factor for black children against anxiety and depression. And I think it was the week before that we talked about like children are more likely to go farther, black children, when they have a black teacher. Y'all really should be following all of our social media, because we be dropping like knowledge like every day, just putting it out there, not just like, you know, we post infographics, research studies, all that stuff. We're like, got a whole brand.
Oh, y'all gonna get these shameless plugs.
Yeah. We're doing like, we have grown as a brand like significantly.
At the Black Unconscious on Instagram, Black BLK Unconscious on Twitter, and the Black Unconscious on Facebook.
Yeah, we do all like I think we're doing good, right? We haven't even been up for a year yet.
No, it's been a few months.
Yeah,
it's been a few months.
Pretty good.
But we do have to wrap up, folks. I think.
I want to do the quote. And then get your opinion on the quote, and then we can wrap up.
Okay, can I just say one thing before you do the quote? What I guess. Actually, no. You read the quote first, because I think the thing that I'm going to say is going to be good about a nice reflective aspect of the.
Okay, so this guy I went to school with, who was it, high school with, Fred Andre. So he posted this thing saying people who were raised on love see and do things differently from people raised on survival. So I was loved growing up from my parents. So as a result, I can't just cut people off, hold grudges, or not apologize when I'm wrong, because my upbringing won't allow me to. And when I saw that, I was like, you know what? That makes a lot of sense. And when we're talking about families and family systems and how the family imparts, like how basically everything will go into your other relationships, think about that. Like if you're reared in a certain environment with like love and I don't know if he had both of his parents in his house. I don't know, but he didn't even have to state that. He was just saying that both of his parents loved him, so it doesn't even have to be. I will say it to the cows come home. A lot of parents think that divorce is the detriment of children, but it's conflict. Okay, so if you can be divorced and have less conflict, you're doing your child a service. Right. If you're married and you have conflict, you're doing your child a disservice. Figure it out. It's not divorce. that makes it difficult on children. It is conflict.
Right.
And a lot of parents who are co-parenting have way less conflict co-parenting in separate homes than they did parenting together in the same home.
In other words, it's about the emotional environment that the child is experiencing. It's not about whether the two parents are together. If you're together and unhappy, your child does learn, implicitly or explicitly, that it's okay to be unhappy. It's okay to be with people for reasons other than like you wanting to be with them. Yeah, which is a really, really important part about having a romantic relationship. Yeah, you gotta want to be there. I mean, think about like how that impacts one's quality of life and level of life satisfaction. So that child then learns like how to manage their own desires for satisfaction through witnessing their parents. I think that quote is awesome.
You will always be a better dad and a better mom when you are a happy dad and a happy mom. Yeah. And so if you're with this person and you're not happy, just move out, divorce, do something else. Like, but don't think that, I don't know who started this, but don't think that it's like, oh, we're not going to divorce. We're going to stay together with the child. One of my friends who's in my cohort, she said it was like one of the happiest days when she found out her parents were getting divorced. She was like, oh my God. Yeah, I've heard that too. She was like, finally, okay. Yeah. Okay. Because y'all can't stand each other and you're not hiding it well. No matter how well y'all think y'all are hiding it, you're not.
No. There's no really such thing as like hiding like unsatisfaction, sadness,
for this mofo. Like, I'm just sick of your damn face.
You feel it. Whether it be the lack of talking, the lack of conversation at the dinner table. So anyway, I think to kind of like go back to the quote just really quickly, is that like, right, like if someone leaves your family like unexpectedly, let's say like mom or dad just decided to up and dip out, completely surprisingly, no explanation, right? Entering into other love relationships where there's a sincere and deep connection, you're always going to have that kind of sense of like, I hope you don't leave. Not always, but it's something that is a part of your psychology and relationships. And again, that could be something that you could address in therapy and learn how to maneuver around or gain a little more autonomy and control over.
There is nothing wrong with a blended family. Some of the most beautiful families I've seen are blended. I think there's always issues with unhappy families. But
yeah.
That always drives me insane. And I have families like, oh, we're staying together for the kids. Oh, are you? Because they're miserable.
That's not a thing.
That's not a thing. Please, everyone understand. It is not a thing. If you want to think of anything, get divorced for the kids.
If you're unhappy, if you're unhappy, it's not a thing. But,
it's not a thing.
And obviously, everyone's logistics and finances are different, and so I guess you have to take that into consideration, of course. Mm-hmm. But if you have the means to kind of separate, and you need to because the conflict is that bad in the home, you actually do the kids more service.
You can still separate. There are families who separate. They're still living together because it's easier to live together. But just the acknowledgement of them not having to feel like they have to be together and act like they're living their lives together takes off a huge weight off there. Just the acknowledgement of like we're no longer together.
Yeah. Last, I guess, can I do like a closing remark?
Yeah, I don't care.
Quick. We gotta wrap up,
This is
don't
the
we?
thing that like makes people think I beat you or something.
People
Stop
don't think
laughing.
that.
Yes, they do. Somebody commented. Even Brandon said one time, he said, man, you just don't let up off justice. I was like, shut your face.
Raquel, you know that you be pushing boundaries sometimes.
First of all, boundaries are there to be pushed.
But I know we have to wrap up. We do have to wrap up. I was wondering like how much time. You're keeping the time this time, so.
All right. Oh yeah. Okay. Well, yeah.
All right.
Anyway. And when if I'm done listening to you, I'll just cut it off.
That'll just
and
be
you'll
our
be
ending?
Like, what? I just listened to the episode and my entire amazing quote is gone. I was like, oh yeah, I just cut that off.
Just end. Like no, just nothing. All right. So real quickly, I guess to kind of encapsulate.
Sorry, that would be such an asshole.
And everyone listening would just be like, wait, what is that? Like,
I wouldn't do that, but that would be
was
so
that a
funny.
Technical issue? Like, did it die? Is there something wrong with my?
Oh my god,
my phone?
That would be so funny.
That would be
damn it.
Ridiculous.
I wouldn't do that, but that would be funny. Okay, I'm sorry.
Anyway, well, to just kind of like summarize like a lot of the things that we've said so far, Right? Families are imperfect, but good families try to love each other the best that they can with the best intentions and to be present with one another. Despite those intentions, you'll get benefits and the merit of those intentions, but you can also experience some of the imperfections that we all have, and then it impacts who you are as a person. I would encourage every single family, to just be mindful, and every parent in particular, to be mindful of the expectations that you have for your child and the child's ability to pick up on those expectations without you even having to say a thing or to communicate it explicitly. Children do feel those things, and depending on who your child is, they may be more or less sensitive to those expectations and figure out ways to interact with them that can benefit them, but also not so much. For example, a child who just knows their parents wants them to kind of go on to school and graduate and get a lot of make good money and get advanced degrees. They'll live with the pressure of that, or sacrifice some of their own self-fulfillment in order to make sure that happens. So you just want to be mindful of those kind of things as a parent. As a child, you want to be mindful that your parents are parents, that they're humans, that they have their own. I mean, when you become an adult,
they're not going to listen to this.
Yeah, maybe not. But just know that your parents are human too, and they have their own needs, and they've lived their own life, and they've had certain experiences that you have not, and vice versa. And I think it's really important for every family member to know that each person is their own individual person. Especially like parents have their ideas about the child being very similar to them or doing things that they would like them to do. The child may even develop ideas about following in their parents' footsteps. And all those things have their place and work well to certain degrees depending on who you are. But it's also important to know that you're different, right? The child is different from you. You are different from the child and their own individual person. And they need to develop certain things that may be different from you and have a life that is their own. It's also important for every family to also have the emotional space within their home where there can be intermittent dependence, where there's a level of trust and safety, where things can be discussed and explored. And that's how you have the best of both worlds, where there's independence and dependence, and there's something called interdependence, where you can be your full autonomous self as an adult or as a young adult who's has the capacity to do those sort of things. And you can also rely on your support system when you need help and when you need someone to be by your side.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that those are great points. So we're just going to wrap up on that because I don't think there's any other, any better way to end. This will be actually the last episode before the holiday season. We're not going to be recording next week. We also had an awesome mail episode, but we had some technical difficulties, unfortunately, guys. So we are going to re-record it and release that after the holiday. So this episode is released on the 21st. We're not going to have an episode that next week, and then we'll come back the week after that. So we hope everyone enjoys their holidays, have an amazing time, protect your mental health, stay away from all of your family's passive-aggressive comments about not coming with a man or a woman, gaining weight. Don't make your kids sit on anyone else's lap if they don't want to. Don't make your kid hug people if they don't want to. Consent is important at all ages. Yeah. That's all I got.
That was a good wrap up. Reminder. And it's going to be on the 20th. We'll publish it on the 20th.
20th. Okay, yes, I'm sorry.
Thursday
yeah,
20th.
So it's going to be on the 20th.
Right.
And anything you want to add?
That's it. And then our next episode we'll be releasing, I guess, we'll be giving you guys information as we go about when we'll be releasing our next episode.
Yeah, we're gonna do the next one. Will be the mail one. We're just gonna redo the mail one.
Right. But then and after the holidays, and we'll let you guys know the date.
Yeah. So as always, follow us on social media: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and you can find us anywhere you can find a podcast. And hit subscribe if you want to hear us every single Thursday. Have a great time. Enjoy your holiday. Happy New Year. All that stuff.
Take care, guys.
Take care.